joke is told about a local charity that had never received a donation from the town's banker. So the director picked up the phone, got him on the other line, and said, "Our records show you make $500,000 a year, yet you have not given a penny to charity," the director began. Wouldn't you like to help the community?" And the banker replied, "Did your research show that my mother is ill with extremely expensive medical bills?" "Oh, no," said the director. "Or that my brother is in a bind and he's unemployed, or that my sister's husband has died, leaving her broke with 4 kids." "Oh," the director said, I had no idea." So the banker said, "If I didn't give them any money, why would I give any to you?" It's been said that people who are already wealthy stay that way because they don't give their money away. But if you listen to those who have amassed great spiritual wealth in their lifetime, you know that that's completely backward. The best way to amass great amounts of spiritual capital, and even sometimes material wealth, is to give it away. If you listen to that Jesus guy, the best way to achieve spiritual wealth is to sell everything you have and give it to the poor. But you know, that's an instruction that few of us are really ready to go and do. So we continue to feel like we're in poverty, even though we live in this land of plenty. The spiritual masters say if you really want to grow your wealth, though, you can't hoard it. You got to give it away. You got to give it away wastefully, joyfully, and not worry about whether your needs will be met, because they will, with plenty and then some. And when you can trust that spiritual law, that giving and receiving are the same, then you get to say, "Oh yeah, I am happy to say this morning, my fellow jubilants, that I have plenty and then some." In fact, I would say that the vast majority of us in this room and watching on YouTube, whether you believe it or not, you have plenty and then some too. According to research from the Pew Center, when compared to the rest of the world, 56% of Americans are considered high income by a global standard, which means they lived on $50 a day back in 2015. And 32% of us can be considered upper middle class, which means we live on $10 to $20 a day. And only 2% of Americans, by a global standard, would be considered poor, living on just $2 a day. So what that means is, if you've got a roof over your head, if you have food on the table, a bed to sleep in at night that's enclosed by like a house, you are already wealthier than more than half of the rest of the world. Now, most of the time, my first instinct is sort of to sneer at people who tell me, "Oh, count your blessings." But jubilants, we so often get caught up in our own problems and our feelings of lack that we miss the forest for the trees. No matter how financially poor we think we are at the moment, the vast majority of us have lifestyles that people in other countries and other places around the globe, they only dream about. So yeah, this is a moment when we can stop and count our blessings. But it's also a moment about how we can, thinking about how we could spread those blessings to help somebody else get plenty and then some too, because as Gandhi once observed, there is enough in the world for everyone's need, but not everyone's greed. But while we are pretty darn financially wealthy here in America, I would submit this morning that most of us around the world, and especially maybe here in America, we are living in spiritual poverty. Everybody talks about God, no shortage of that. But what's being offered to us most often about God and about how God works in the world can be compared to junk food, or perhaps Chinese food. It's filling for an hour or two, and then you're longing again. You're all hungry all over again. Popular religion, it is it is heavy on showmanship, light on theological heft. We're told that God is either a harsh taskmaster who punishes us for our mistakes and sends us to some fiery hell if we don't get our beliefs or our actions just right, according to some church's interpretation of Scripture, or we're told that God is really good And if you just believe that and act rightly, according to some churches' interpretation of Scripture, you're going to be blessed with all the material goods you could ever want or need or wish for. And often these views of God tend to be one and the same, because if you don't follow the prescribed beliefs and actions, this God turns on a dime. It can go from a good, benevolent God to a condemning one, just like that. So people are starving out there. They're starving for some sort of deep spirituality, that assurance that God is neither a harsh dictator nor a happy, slappy Santa Claus who knows if you've been sleeping and knows if you're awake and knows if you've been good or bad, so be good for goodness sake, and then hands out all those material goodies for your moral track record. No, people are yearning for a relationship with the God, the holy, the divinity that resides within each of us, that higher divine self that allows us to see the innocence of the world despite all the ego's evidence to the contrary. We're not finding that in most churches today, evidenced by the fact that the fastest growing segment of the religious population are those who claim no religious preference at all, or what the pollsters have come to call the nones. And not nuns like Catholic nuns, but N-O-N-E-S. In 1948, 2% of the population of the U.S. were nuns. But last year, the Gallup poll showed 29% are claiming that designation. Most of those, about 40%, are under the age of 30, and globally, the unaffiliated make up 16% of the population and actually is the second largest religious group in almost half the world. That's a trend right there. The time is surely coming, wrote the prophet Isaiah all those millennia ago. Says the Lord God, when I will send a famine on the land, not a famine of bread or thirst for water, but of the hearing of the words of the Lord. And I believe we are in that famine right now, jubilants. Turn on the news, social media, you'll see we are all starving for some holy words. We're starving for loving words that can set this world right and bring us back together and remind us of our unity and not our separation. Within each of us jubilants, we have plenty of those words to share. The key to feasting on them is to turn away from the junk food fed to us by the fearful and open ourselves to that bountiful, holy love that we already possess. It's already within us. And this just sounds crazy to our ego, but you know, Jesus has a joke about that. But most preachers are far too serious to laugh at the punchline in today's parable from the Jesus story. It's easy to see why, because usually whenever Jesus tells a story, whoever is cast in the character of master is usually God. But if you read today's story in that context, you get this really disturbing picture of God as a deity that praises us and even encourages us to deal dishonestly with each other and with God. Here we have this guy. He's working for the master, and he knows this master is about to fire him because some co-worker snitched on him about being crooked. And the guy is all worked up because if he loses his job, he doesn't know what to do. He's not strong enough for physical labor. He's too proud to beg, so he figures if he cuts deals with all of the people who owe his master money, then they'll like him enough that perhaps when he's unemployed, maybe they'll take him in and support him. I don't know. But he goes down the list with this agenda to ingratiate himself. And he ultimately gets something more than the money for the master. So he cuts these deals. So now he's prepared. Boss can fire him. That's all right. He squared everything away. Got a lot of people who owe him a favor now. But surprise of surprises, the boss doesn't fire him. Instead, Jesus says the boss man is pleased. This guy is shrewd. He's dishonest. But man, look at him make those deals. You see why this story kind of gives preachers fits, because it puts us in the position of having to defend a God that rewards liars and cheats. But if we look at this parable in its deeper context, we find that instead of this story being a parable about God, it is a joke. And the Pharisees, who are the ones listening to this little story, are the butt of the joke. You see, the master is not God in this story, but it is the Pharisees, which Luke describes as lovers of money. The master thinks the worker is ripping him off, so he asks for an audit of his accounts. But before he can do that, the guy goes out and cuts some deals, gets the master just a fraction of what he's owed. And usually this would make the boss mad, right? That they owe us far more money. Go get the rest of the money. But no, the master understands what the worker did, and even though it was dishonest, it made the master look good in the eyes of those who owed him money. While the manager may have shorted his boss on some accounts, the goodwill that he created, the fine reputation he gave his boss as merciful, was far more worth money to the master. It's true of religious leaders these days. Their reputation, that's their stock and trade, man. They know that even if they lose a little money here or there when the IRS comes calling, or perhaps they get caught in some other kind of swindle, they can ask for forgiveness, and their faithful followers will more than make up for whatever money they might have lost. But here's the best part of the joke that just sails right over the Pharisees' heads. The manager in the story is really doing God's work when he goes and cuts all those deals with the master's debtors, because what he is doing is the holy work of forgiveness. Even if he has that ego-driven agenda of ingratiating himself to those debtors, God is still using him to mend relationships and forgive those who have been put in debt by the master. And so this is the crux of the joke. According to Australian pastor Peter Lockhart, he writes, "I think Jesus is saying to the Pharisees and scribes who see themselves as his master, what I am doing brings honor to all of us, to you as well. And rather than grumbling, you should be commending me for doing God's will." So the true message of this story is that worldly wealth isn't the path to God. Instead, the path is in relationships. It's in forgiving the people who we believe owe us something or have slighted us in some way. This is a story about building spiritual wealth by letting go of our fear that we'll be screwed over by others and instead loving them despite their flaws that we want to project onto them. Which, of course, to the Pharisees was all just crazy talk, which is why they didn't get the joke. You know, it's been said that you can't, if somebody's salary depends on not getting something or not understanding something, they're not going to understand it. So the Pharisees' power prevented them from getting this joke. But this is the heart of Jesus' message. He constantly has told us to act in ways that the world calls insane by forgiving everyone, turning the other cheek, going the extra mile, inviting people to your parties even though they can never do anything for you in return. Sell all you have and give it to the poor. Everything Jesus tells us to do is crazy according to this world. But Jesus is saying it's the ego's world that's nuts, because it teaches us that we're separate from everyone else and we have to compete for resources, and there's lack in both money and wealth and power and love. To Jesus, that's crazy talk. Instead, the only sane thing to do in this world is when you got plenty and then some, is that you help somebody else get plenty and then some too. Because if we don't, then the joke's on us. The reason that the nuns left the church in the first place, according to all the other surveys, is because they found it to be judgmental and homophobic, and generally exclusive of people considered those people by those who were accepted by the church. Instead, what these nuns crave, as Jesus tried to point out in his joke, are relationships. Back in the years when I taught religion at Midlands Technical College, the major class assignment in my comparative religion class was for groups of students to create their own religion. Now, the ones who took it seriously and didn't create religions we already have around shopping and football and money, they really based their religions. They thought about it. They put some thought into it. And their religions were all based on building deep, lasting relationships. Not just between the adherents of that belief, but with the world. Every one of those religions had festivals, they had gatherings, they had other ways for people to come together and really connect with one another, more than just like on a Sunday morning. But what each of these religions lacked, every single one of them, was a concept of either eternal hell or an eternal heaven. The afterlife didn't interest these students. Instead, their concern, like that of the so-called dishonest manager, was to create meaning here, in this present moment. The most meaningful thing that they could think to create was lasting, deep, and intimate relationships with one another. These kids, they deeply understood that true wealth can only be found in forgiveness, in restored relationships, in reaching out, becoming the love that they wanted to be in the world. They instinctually understood what A Course in Miracles said from today. Your task is not to seek for love, but merely to seek and find all the barriers within yourself that you have built against it. These students knew that most modern religion, instead of freeing us from our barriers to love, seek to just erect more barriers by pointing out who is saved and who is damned, who's good, who's evil, who we should judge, who we should accept, recalcitrant. And more people are waking up from this kind of religion, the famine that it produces, because they want to feast on words of love and healing and relationship. And that may be bad news for mainstream religion, but it's good news for the world, because it means more people are realizing that love and forgiveness are the keys to real wealth, which can't be found in money or power or prestige. That manager in Jesus' joke, he stumbles onto the truth because of his own fear that he's going to be fired. And that fear created a hell for him, and our fears create our own hell for us every moment, because we have located our happiness or love somewhere outside of ourselves in the form of institutions or money or a good reputation or the newest gadget, much like the Pharisees in Jesus' day. But every day, we reinforce that fear when we judge people, when we hold grudges, when we refuse to forgive either ourselves or others. But when we finally get fed up with the hatred, when we get fed up with the greed, when we get fed up with the violence and the indifference that our collective ego has created in this world, perhaps too, we will feel the motivation to try the other way. Because there is a better way, jubilance. And that is to create peace. That is to create harmony and joy by forgiving all of those around us that we believe owe us something. We settle accounts with them. We let them off the hook. We stop blaming them for our problems and instead see the true source of all the problems as the ego's lie that we're really separate from each other and from God. Will people still take advantage of you if you're so forgiving all the time? Well, of course. That's the way ego-driven people work, who fully believe in this lie of separation. Like the Pharisees, they're going to always be looking for an angle, and some may even see their dishonesty as God-ordained. Gee, we don't see that in the modern world, do we? But when you encounter people like this, you have a choice. You can respond to them in fear, or you can respond in love. And you will know that you are in fear because your heart will close and you will start to judge them. And you will complain about them. You will hold a grudge against them for how they treated you so wrongly. But if you're spiritually wealthy, jubilants, you'll see their actions, and instead of jumping to judgment, your first gut response will be compassion. And as Marianne Williamson says, when people do take advantage of you or tempt you to judge them, what they're doing is they're really showing you their wounds. A Course in Miracles says every action is either love or a call for love. And when people try to abuse you, they're just calling for love, like a child showing you their boo-boo, Marianne Williamson says. The parent doesn't get mad at the child for getting hurt. No, they just kiss the boo-boo. They try to make it better. And people who are stuck in their own ego world of separation and competition, jubilants, they're wounded. And when they treat us or others badly, they're just showing us their wounds. It's just a call for love. And we can either judge them out of fear, or we can love them and kiss their boo-boos. But as we said before, being spiritually mature doesn't mean being stupid. If another person does mean you harm in some way, whether physically, mentally, or spiritually, forgiveness doesn't mean you got to be their buddy. You don't have to go to lunch with them. You don't have to give them the keys to your car. It does mean you have to stop judging them and instead look beyond their ego. See their divinity, no matter how deeply it might be buried at the moment. And you will know that you have achieved this great spiritual wealth, jubilance, not by how many hours you sit in church or how many spiritual books you read, but whether or not your first reaction to anyone in this world, no matter who they are or what they do or have done to you in the past, is to shower them with your wealth of divine love, to give it wastefully, not expecting anything in return, because that is no joke. Oh yeah.